I'm Piercy Janwell, and you're listening to Unsubscribed. Every episode, I sit down with business leaders to help you question everything you thought you knew about marketing. If you enjoy this show, please do subscribe and leave a review on YouTube or your favorite podcast player. Now, on to this episode. If you're in marketing operations and you're on LinkedIn, you've probably heard of Chris Willis. Chris is a Marketo champion and is currently the Senior Marketing Operations Manager at Trimble, a global leader in construction technology. His goal is to help marketers leverage tools and processes to drive ROI. Chris, it's so awesome to have you on the Unsubscribe podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Pierce. It's an honor.
I've got a lot of questions for you today, and
I'm sure you do.
I want to tap into all of that amazing thought leadership that you share with all of us on LinkedIn. I'm a big fan of your posts. And maybe to start, all of the marketing ops people I talk to, they usually have an interesting story about how they ended up in marketing operations. So can you share your story with us?
Sure. I can share a little bit about my story. So in 2008, I moved out of kind of sales consulting and landed a job with a kind of a startup company that just got bought by Vertafore named ImageRight. Got started as a marketing analyst there. It was right when marketing automation was just starting up. And one of my first assignments was to set up their Salesforce.com org. And as a guy with marketing DNA, I thought about a lot about campaign attribution, like clean data, clean leads, accounts, contacts, all those things that you want to have to make sure that you're attributing like the marketing activities. And like what we did was pretty light back in the day. But I had a huge focus on making sure that what we produce from a marketing perspective translated into attribution to our sales. Fast forward about a year, I didn't really consider myself an operations person, but I had a meeting with my boss and they told me, "Hey, Chris, you're moving into sales ops." So I got voluntold. Happened to be one of the best career moves I ever had, because like moving from like just, you're just part of a marketing organization to really thinking about operations, thinking about like, the process of how, in my world, how like leads get to the sales organization and translate into opportunities so that we can forecast effectively. Really helped me as I made the transition into a marketing operations role. So fast forward about 3 years, I had an opportunity to move into a role with McKesson, and it was again a sales operations role, but they had this thing called Marketo, and I always had this desire to move into the marketing ops world. Actually, I wanted to move into marketing automation. I shouldn't say I didn't really know what marketing ops was at the time. But I was excited about like taking this marketing automation tool that they had and really kind of developing that marketing engine like I had at the beginning of my time at ImageRight. And quickly fell in love with Marketo, learned about all the things, lead lifecycle, like, campaign management, nurturing, etc. And probably got it wrong more than I got it right there. I was one of these new Marketo admins that didn't have a huge amount of support. I had a mentor in the name of a guy, Mitch Diamond, who helped me along the way. But I wasn't introduced into a lot of the best practices until I took on a new role and like essentially set up Marketo like brand new for the first time at a company called Electa, who sells like radiation therapy equipment. I was there, kind of stood up my first lead lifecycle, all the lead management processes, had a really great team, had a great relationship with the sales leaders over there. Scott Soul, like what he's done over there is really awesome. And yeah, that's how I got started, and kind of fast forward to where I am today at Trimble. A lot of that experiences helped kind of influence who I am, and what I bring to the table, from thinking about like reusability, thinking about life cycle process, thinking about aligning with sales and how that happens, whether you have sales development reps or not. Um, there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of experience that's come into play in my marketing operations career. Not necessarily, it hasn't necessarily been just a straight line. There's been a lot of learning in those 10 years, which I try to bring into my posts occasionally, without going too deep into kind of what brought about some of those those learnings.
Yeah. I love it. I feel like voluntold is part of everybody in marketing ops, the story at one point or the other. But it's
I think at
interesting that,
least,
yeah.
yeah, I think at least half of us, if not more. I think I ran a poll in LinkedIn, and I think most of us, I think it was like 60%, were at some point voluntold into the
Yeah.
role.
Yeah. Yeah, and it ended up being a good outcome, a good voluntold outcome. Your experience
Mm-hmm.
is interesting too, though, having sort of the sales ops side. I'd imagine that would be really helpful to really understand kind of both sides, right? Marketing
Mm-hmm.
and also what happens to those leads once they go over into the CRM.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, it's also given me appreciation for like our primary customer in marketing, which in B2B marketing is our sales organizations. Because ultimately, we can be doing all the activity just right, generating the right leads, getting the hand raisers. But if we don't have a clean handoff to create like opportunities in the CRM that are attributed to our leads, that have a predictable flow, it takes a lot out of what we do from a marketing organization. Essentially, if we don't have that, then we're operating in marketing based upon vanity metrics, not based upon revenue. It's hard to tell what is really impacting, what's really impactful. So my experience in sales ops comes into my marketing ops like DNA, into my life pretty regularly, because ultimately I really care about that handoff, and making sure that that is that's something that's smooth. That's something that like everybody in the chain understands what their next steps are, and that like opportunities that are created in the funnel can backtrack, or like go back upstream, and we can see what marketing activities help that along, and not trying to create a competitive thing with marketing and sales, because we all have been in those conversations where marketing says, I got you the deal. Sales says, well, that's, insert explicative here, not true. I got the deal because I'm an amazing sales rep. And we all know that the story is in the middle. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I've also become convinced, probably in the last year and a half, because I've definitely been, on both sides, you know, and more so with marketing DNA, to look at, how can we help marketing kind of get more budget so that they can influence more deals. But it's not a competitive thing with
Mm-hmm.
sales. Like sales does do a lot of work on their end in order to qualify the deal, because we in marketing can't qualify the deal like a lot. I mean, there's a certain level of qualification we can do, but ultimately we can't instinctively tell if they have budget, authority to buy, timeline. Or if we try to do that, then like our lead requirements get so intense that we don't really give that many leads to sales, and then sales becomes an order taking machine. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not really helpful for our organizations, because we want them to go out and discover opportunity, not just take orders and add no value.
Totally. It's that finding that balance, getting onto that one team, one dream. That's what we're looking to do here at NAC. So for the people out there who might not be familiar with Trimble, can you give us sort of a little bit of background on the company, and then just also maybe kind of the size and scale of the team that you run?
Sure. So Trimble started about 43, hopefully I get that right, 43 years ago as a GIS company, making GIS receivers. Charlie Trimble, who came out of Hewlett Packard, kind of started the company in the GIS space. And over the last, 43 years, I believe it's 43, we've grown into this kind of industrial technology powerhouse that started with GIS, but has expanded as we've grown into different industry verticals. We've made a lot of acquisitions to kind of fill in the space and make ourselves a complete technology provider. Now, kind of, we're based on a platform that is there to support like several core industries that we that have like a usability case study for what we do within kind of the GNSS core. So we serve like natural resources, agriculture, forestry, construction, which is where I work. There's a lot of great applications, both from like machine control on the construction equipment that is used to kind of get our roads built to scale, faster, cheaper, more efficient, as well as like kind of the world of BIM, or building information management, that helps us kind of build this kind of like, we call it a constructible model, essentially where you design a building or design a project using our SketchUp software, or SketchUp 3D management software. That gets transformed into kind of a constructible model through our Tekla software. And then eventually that becomes spec that is used to build the building or the project to scale. And that's pretty high level.
Wow.
I'm not necessarily a product expert, but that's, it's really cool how, like, we talked about, like, as a company, we transform the way that the world works using a lot of this technology. And including that is like, we were involved in like autonomous. I got a chance to play with some of our autonomous vehicle technology within construction last week. And it's really cool, like how effective the autonomy technology allows us to do a lot more efficient job than if we had an inexperienced operator. And believe me, I was an inexperienced operator using some of these machines. It's really amazing what we're now able to do with the technology that we enable.
That's
amazing. Probably about a half of what we do.
Cool.
But I know we want to talk about marketing automation too.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, ever since I heard of you guys, I've yet to be to a construction site where I don't see a Trimble logo somewhere. And I'm like, what? Yep. They've always been there. So I mean, I'd love to hear more kind of about your role, at Trimble. What are you responsible for? What are you helping the company achieve when it comes to marketing operations?
Yeah. So my role has evolved. So currently I am the senior manager of marketing operations within our construction sector. It is like one of our largest sectors. We are synonymous with construction. It's true. You go out to like a highway site, you're going to see one of our scanners or one of our toll stations, or you'll see like our technology on kind of the bulldozers at the construction site. So we do a lot in construction. And behind that is a lot of the acquisitions that we brought along within construction. Each of us brought in our own tech stacks, our own marketing automation systems, our own kind of approaches to lead management, as well as our own kind of marketing technology approaches. So one thing that I've been doing over the last 4 years is helping to create like an operational consistency with how we operate in each of these businesses. So primarily, you've been in the Marketo world, so you kind of understand, like, having the core of like, lead life cycle, consistent lead stages, revenue models that Marketo is using to move leads through the funnel, as well as consistent program setups, lead scoring, etc. And one thing that I've really loved is transforming us from a bunch of groups that are kind of sending a lot of emails and doing a lot of good marketing, but not necessarily operationally consistent, into helping that same group become much more effective and much more consistent and much more measurable using kind of the Marketo best practices, the workflow capabilities that that I bring to the table. And one thing that's really exciting is that, like, my role is kind of shifting, where I'm going to be like looking at a lot of our processes for like lead management, campaign management, opportunity management, kind of bringing my sales ops experience in the table, owning this process for our digital transformation efforts shortly. So I'm actually going to be, possibly by the time we're finish recording this, I might actually have a title change on LinkedIn.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
So,
congrats. Yeah. That's exciting stuff.
It is really exciting. Companies that like ours that grow by acquisition, we've got a lot of different processes that we have to kind of figure out, like, how do we become more effective and efficient with these? So, a lot of companies go through these digital transformation projects, and it's really exciting to see how our organization has been kind of transforming ourselves over the last couple of years. And what's really been awesome, not, this is by no means an employment endorsement for Trimble, even though it is. I'll shamelessly plug Trimble all the time. Is that the culture, even in the midst of change, the culture at Trimble has been so encouraging. Like, it's a culture where everybody wants to step up to the plate and help each other. And you don't see that a lot of places. Like, our leadership has put a lot of effort into culture, into enabling this process where we're working alongside of each other. We're not competing with each other. And it's really exciting, especially as the delivery, the marketing operations delivery role that I've been in is going to be backfilled. And like, I'm excited for the person that's going to come into that role because they're going to get to step into that culture and take advantage of a lot of the really cool things that we've done and be able to take it to the next level.
That's amazing. And can you talk, we've been talking a lot on the podcast recently, just as marketing ops teams get bigger, how leaders are kind of setting up those teams. How do you structure them? Who is focused on what? And maybe we could talk a little bit too about centralization versus decentralization. I'd love to get your take on that.
Sure. I think all of us in marketing operations ultimately want to lean towards centralization. I will say, though, that the centralization decentralization discussion has to take into account the strategy of your organization and how your organization views kind of how work gets done. So our approach is probably a little bit different than some of the approaches that you've had, just because we do think about our company, and especially from a campaign delivery perspective, in a hybrid, centralized, decentralized perspective, where marketing ops, like core marketing ops, like lifecycle approaches to using Marketo, are going to be, probably going to be more and more centralized, because those are, those are repeatable processes. These are things that don't necessarily change, depending upon what the sector, what the sector is doing from a go-to-market perspective. However, like from a campaign deliveries perspective, our strategy, and I think it's a really great strategy, is that we want to be close to the customer. We want to be able to like shift our approach depending upon how the specifics of like interacting with the customers are going to be. So we're always going to have that decentralized approach, and I think where it comes into like where your company is involved, like with like email marketing, is your approach, like NAC's approach, really helps us really well. In regards of, we can have a centralized approach to campaign management where our Marketo programs are set up, they're optimized around kind of our best practices, our reporting mechanisms, all of those bits and pieces. But the email side of it, the creative side of it, so the emails and the landing pages are able to be, like, the execution of that is able to be decentralized through NAC. And having having templates, having brand guidelines that allow marketers to kind of operate in the messaging world within NAC, and then having an operational approach so that those messages can get operationalized in Marketo through kind of our standard standard workflows, program templates, program channels, has been a pretty huge win. Because before we had NAC, like, we had, like, marketers wanted to be flexible, but unfortunately, marketing automation platforms don't enable like the level of complexity that a lot of the creative marketers want. So we've always had that, that tension of, like, we want to have clonable, repeatable, reusable, like, everything. And we struggled with trying to implement that within the platforms. There's only so much, like, HTML coded emails that we could build, and additionally, our program templates had to be built around our email layouts. So anytime we decided to go with a new email template, we literally had to redo our program execution templates. So what NAC allowed us to do is essentially separate the execution and allowed us to create, like, very unique execution templates that were asset neutral, and then allowed the creative execution, so the email and the landing page builds, to be handled in NAC. And then we created operational workflows through approval processes, through integrations with Marketo, that allowed those to be, like, put into market relatively efficiently. And it's really been a huge win. So we have, like, the best of both worlds. We have operational best practice, and we have creative best practices that allow us to do more and have good, consistent process within our kind of hybrid, centralized, decentralized approach.
Incredible. I mean, and hang on, I think, you're a Marketo champion, Chris. Like, why would you advocate for a solution that takes email and landing page out of Marketo? Doesn't Marketo do that already?
It's true. Marketo does do that. And so Marketo's email engine is pretty good. And I would say it's really good, especially if you have some really killer HTML coding skills. So, however, I think that's a pretty niche-y group of marketing automation companies. Like, I think you ran or not marketing automation companies, but marketing operations managers. I think you did a poll on your LinkedIn today talking about HTML skills. And
I did, yeah.
I don't have HTML skills. And I remember, like, early on when, we were like marketing operations was like the team of one, and we're literally expected to know everything. Like I had to get agencies in to do HTML emails. I don't have the HTML chops to do much more than just kind of cleanup formatting. So I don't know how many marketing operations people out there like can code emails, do workflows, manage sales processes, and a partridge in a pear tree, and keep your head on straight. So I know that's a long-winded answer, but like why I, as a Marketo champion, like advocated for NAC is number one for the reason I just mentioned to you before. In order for us to have flexibility with our templates, literally created a situation where we were having to recreate Marketo program templates constantly, and for every new kind of creative design that our marketing teams wanted. And it just was not very efficient at all. So ultimately, and this is what I would say as a Marketo champion, as a Marketo expert, is if you're not centralized, and I think even if you are centralized, because ultimately you want to have creative flexibility, you want to have creative control over your assets, including email and landing page, and you don't want assets to live outside of Marketo ultimately. So I'll touch on that in a little bit, because that's a big pain point for some of us in the Marketo world. But think about this. Marketo is primarily a workflow engine. It's there to make sure that your marketing processes are running effectively, that your programs or your campaigns are running repeatable, predictable, the lead scoring is done effectively. And ultimately, email is a piece of that. But one thing that can steal a lot of time is the back and forth about email designs, because that does require HTML coding to be done very well. And if we want to be able to take advantage of Marketo's cloning, the best practice approach is that you always include your assets in your templates. I can tell you, marketers never use the program template as it is. As much as we try, and I've never worked in an organization where like marketing operations controlled everything. There's always like you put it out there and you see what they do with it.
I'm sitting here laughing at this, Chris, because I mean, I have been there personally. You spend months creating these program templates. You try and get all their feedback. You build it out, you try and make it flexible, and then they don't use it. And I think
and if
as
they
marketing
do
ops
use
people,
it, and if they do use it, they complain about it.
Yeah, I think we all feel good as marketing ops to be like, look at that. I built my program template. Like, my job here is done. But is that reality?
So there's that piece of it. Why I've advocated for NAC within my company is primarily because it actually puts marketing ops back in control of Marketo, because you can essentially have marketing ops kind of handling the workflow engine side of the house, focusing on data, processes, best practices, and then you can shift the creative element into NAC, where NAC is enforcing a lot of your brand standards, your template standards within settings that are controlled within NAC. And then ultimately there's a handoff where operations and creative meet, and the templates are not built as like this one size fits all. Everything has to fit within the template, which inevitably some some person in your demand gen team will break because you can't predict everything that they're going to want to do. It's not going to happen. So it allows you to have the workflow flexibility and the asset flexibility, which is really huge for me. And then the second piece, and I think a lot of us in the Marketo world can appreciate this, is on the landing page side. A lot of unless we have strict institutional control, and I've had debates with my fellow kind of Marketo experts and champs about this, about do you have uber centralized control, or do you allow for this creative outsourcing within some of these other tools? And what really kind of pushed us over the edge with NAC was the landing page side. So in a lot of our other worlds, where you have Unbounce or MakeSwift or other platforms, is that you create these landing pages and they basically sit outside of the platform. They're not necessarily compatible with the Marketo forms. And essentially then within the Marketo workflow engine, you have to create a lot of other special rules to get things like attribution done, acquisition program, all those things that Marketo does automatically when you have your landing page sitting inside of your program, get broken with a lot of other tools. So what NAC allows us to do is we can build landing pages that are like those Unbounce, those MakeSwift pages, but instead of having those landing pages sit out on an outside server where we have to do a lot of extra coding in order to make sure our acquisition works, NAC allows those landing pages to be synced directly to our programs, so they act as Marketo landing pages because they are Marketo landing pages when they're synced. And then the forms that are assigned to those will do everything that Marketo is designed to do: give automatic acquisition credit, automatic program membership. So it's less worry on our side. We can actually have landing pages that live in Marketo, use Marketo code, that behave as local Marketo assets, where before we really struggled with that.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear this transformation that you've done, and how, to me, it's about simplicity at the end of the day, Chris, with what you just said, right? Sure, you can integrate your landing pages with other landing page builders, but you got to, do something with an API, and there's a piece that, as you add more complexity to Marketo, then it's harder to maintain, it's harder to make updates. It sounds like a big piece of what this brings is just the pure simplicity of it all.
Which is somewhat not intuitive. Like when I started down the path of exploring email solutions, I thought just about every other Marketo expert did, is why would you live outside of the Marketo tool? Because you have your email tool, you have your guided landing page tool. But those of us in marketing operations generally aren't marketers. We do have marketing DNA. I consider myself a marketer. I actually got my MBA in marketing. So it is something I'm very passionate about. But ultimately, we're not doing a lot of deep messaging work. We're not doing a lot of A/B testing ourselves. We've got demand gen, marketing communications people that are in charge of that, and their pain points are very much different than our pain points. Our pain points are, we want this to be, we want this to execute predictably. We don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. We don't want a program that operates outside of our life cycle constraints. Their pain point is, I want to be able to communicate this message effectively to my audience and understand how I need to evolve my message in order to get better engagement. It's two different pain points. And they're not necessarily considering like, okay, what are the nuances of the smart list, or what trigger do I need to turn on in order to make sure somebody's registered? They're not really thinking about that. So in some ways it's non-intuitive, but in reality, we've actually simplified by splitting them up, because NAC allows them to focus on what they're charged to do, and Marketo allows us to focus on what we're charged to do. And the approval processes give us a way of communicating with one another so that the handoff is smooth.
In our 2022 email benchmark report, we asked the question about how marketing ops are creating emails and landing pages, and almost 60% of the respondents said they're still using templates from within their marketing automation platform. What is it that you have learned in your experience that made you look at trying to solve this in a different way?
No, this is a really good question, and primarily it is company specific. So like in our company, we do have this decentralized kind of demand gen marketing marketing communications kind of approach. So one thing we've learned is that we can't necessarily control like everything to the T. So in a prior world, we did have everything controlled to the T. We had one email template. We had layouts that were governed by Marketo tokens for every single program channel. And like to some degree, we didn't need an email platform like NAC. Everything was very strictly controlled within the system, which made everything very straightforward from a marketing operations perspective. However, I know like having talked to people that the creatives don't really get a lot of satisfaction out of that. And the level of engagement is essentially, or if you're engaged with the brand, and I'm not going to mention which brand this is, it's one of my past companies. I think their operational approach is excellent, but there is something you lose when you tokenize everything, and everything, every single email looks alike. It just is what it is. So you're relying on the strength of your brand to ensure that people are opening and engaging with your emails. And at Trimble, we have an extremely strong brand, but we also want to make sure that we're continuously improving. So as a culture, we never centralize to that degree. And I actually think we're better off for it. Because you've got these groups that are like close to the customer. Each of our customer segments, whether it's like people in farm, people in construction, people that work in these, autonomous kind of vehicle companies, all of them have a different kind of MO. And we need to be able to experiment with different messaging, different layouts, different graphics. And that centralized approach where you're always going to do a headline, 2 paragraphs of body copy, and a button, it may work in the short term, but if you're trying to overall like always be experimenting, you need you need an approach that allows you to experiment. And I think kind of in the state of email marketing, one thing you mentioned is that companies that A/B tests, their layouts, their subject lines, their times of day, all the things, are more successful than companies that don't. So ultimately, I'd rather be on one, over here with a company that is freer to experiment, and becoming more successful over time rather than a company that, they kind of do the same thing over and over again. And it's just two different approaches to demand gen.
I love it. I think a lot of us in marketing got into marketing to be creative, and creativity, I think, has a lot to do with job satisfaction and, at the end of the day, engagement, which in marketing I think is what drives the results, right? So it's awesome to see you really embrace that and empower your marketers to be creative with Knack. It's incredible. I could talk about this all day, but I did want to. We have a section here where we do rapid fire questions that we ask every guest. I'd love to get your take on some of this. So the first one is, what's one marketing trend that you would unsubscribe from?
Wow. I think most people are unsubscribing from this, but the importing lists, like the list vendors. I don't know if that's a trend anymore. I think people are like off of that, off of that train.
I still get emails to buy people's lists every day, which just kills me a little bit inside. So there must be someone out there still buying them.
There's got to be. I don't know if they have chops as a marketer, but that's my hot take for the day.
Yeah. Is email dead?
Oh, absolutely not. Email needs to be used strategically. I think on my LinkedIn, I talk about a lot of like bad sales email habits. Email needs to be used strategically, but email is absolutely not dead. It's still the most effective channel for getting demand in a lot of ways.
At Knack, we're all about work-life balance. I know you've got a bunch of running medals behind you, but what do you do for fun?
So I run. I'm actually trying to get over a running injury right now. I've got 12 half marathon medals back there. I want to go for a 13th. And I downhill ski, volunteer, and my wife and I met because of our love of food and wine. So I love to go to wineries and taste and experience like good food, good wine, and especially good food, good wine pairings, because that is a thing. It's really nice when you get a good food and wine pairing.
What's your favorite wine? This isn't a typical one we ask everyone, but now I'm curious.
So I love the Bordeaux blends. There's a vineyard out in West Colorado. So I'll name drop. It's called Mesa Park. And I learned something new. Is like, I'm a big fan of like French Bordeaux style, but there actually is a difference between the grapes that are grown on the left bank of the. I don't know which river. It's the river that runs through the Bordeaux region of France. But there's like a difference between the grapes that are grown on the left bank and the grapes that are grown on the right bank, and it was really fascinating to experience the tasting of both of those varietals that are based on like the soil composition and the how the river flows through the valley. That was really neat. I think I like the left bank. I love the just traditional Bordeaux blend. It's got to have Cab Franc and Petit Verdot in it. In my opinion, a Bordeaux blend with like the 5 grapes of that Bordeaux varietal. So that's a Cab Sauv, Merlot, Syrah, Petit Verdot, and Cabernet Franc. Like if it's got those 5 grapes in a really good proportion, generally it's usually heavier on the Cab Sauv and the Malbec side. It's a really nice wine, and it's very versatile. You can have it with like Italian food, you could have it with a good charcuterie board, and you can have it with a great steak.
I'm looking forward to going out for dinner with you at some point so that you can help pick the wine. who is one person that you admire in the business community and why?
John Miller, who's at Demand Base now. He was one of the builders of Marketo originally, one of the original founders. Really been impressed with his ability to see market trends, communicate not just with customers and users, but also with technical folks, and help us kind of see the art of the possible. I've always been really impressed with that.
Nice pick. I know you offer a ton of advice on LinkedIn that's super helpful, but what's one piece of advice that you'd like to share here that you think might help others?
I don't know if there's anything I would share here that I haven't shared on my LinkedIn. My number one piece of advice is always keep things straightforward. Look for opportunities to simplify processes. A complicated process helps nobody. And it's harder to create simple than it is to create complex. We tend to create complex just by doing what comes naturally to us. But we have to think about what comes naturally to the people that we're designing processes and designing systems for. And it takes a lot of thought to make things simple. So my advice is always look to simplify.
Amazing. Last one. Who else do you think we should interview on the Unsubscribe podcast?
Who else? I mean, you should definitely interview Sarah McNamara. I follow her on LinkedIn, and she is somebody who will tell it as it is. Has a lot of great advice for marketing ops people, and probably one of the best on the hot takes. I always am very impressed that she's got the courage to say some of the things that all of us are thinking, but none of us are willing to say. So I would definitely recommend, if you haven't interviewed her yet, that you should interview her.
Amazing. Awesome. Yeah, we'll reach out to Sarah. We've worked with her on a couple things before, but it'd be great to have her on. Well, Chris, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed the chat, kind of understanding your background, how you got into marketing ops, how you got voluntold into your first sales ops job.
It's my favorite word ever.
And discovered marketing automation and Marketo. Is really interesting to learn more about your role at Trimble and how you have embraced creativity with NAC and are empowering your marketers to really make that shift from rigid, unflexible templates to give them that creativity to be able to test and try and experiment, but in a way that is on brand for Trimble, a company that's doing some incredible things in the construction technology and autonomous vehicles as well. I didn't know about that, so learned a lot today, including maybe some new wines that I think I need to try out. So thank you so much for joining us on the Unsubscribe podcast. It's been great chatting with you, Chris.
Definitely. It's been great chatting with you too, Pierce.
Thanks for listening to Unsubscribed, a podcast created by NAC. If you enjoyed this episode of Unsubscribed, be sure to subscribe to my podcast and leave a review on your favorite podcast player. If you have any feedback or want to chat, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or follow me on Twitter at marketing_101. Cheers.